The blood-red sunset painted the Colorado sky as Thomas Pierce pressed the telegram against his chest, his heart beating faster than a stampede of wild horses. "She's alive," he whispered, the truth he'd spent 8 years searching for finally confirmed in ink on paper. Penelope Wallace, the girl who'd owned his heart since they were children running barefoot through Pine Creek's meadows, was waiting just 100 miles away in a town he'd never heard of, Spring, 1876. The world had changed dramatically since they were torn apart at 16. The railroad had stretched its iron tendrils across the frontier, cattle barons had seized empires, and Thomas had transformed from a lanky farm boy to a hardened cowboy with calloused hands and sun-weathered skin. But some things remained constant, like the promise they'd made under the ancient oak tree the night before her family forcibly moved east. "I'll find you," he had vowed, his young voice cracking with emotion as he pressed his mother's silver locket into her palm. "No matter how many years it takes." Pine Creek, Colorado had been home to both the Pierces and the Wallaces for generations. The Pierces were cattle ranchers, honest folk who worked the land with respect and diligence. The Wallaces were merchants who'd grown wealthy supplying mining operations throughout the territory. Bad blood between the families had simmered for decades, a dispute over water rights that had festered like an untreated wound, poisoning any possibility of peace. Thomas stared out from the porch of his family's ranch house, his gaze fixed on the mountains that had once felt like prison walls. Now, at 24, he was finally ready to break free. He folded the telegram carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart where Penelope had always resided. "Going somewhere, son." His father's voice carried from the doorway, gruff and weathered as the land he'd worked for 40 years. Thomas turned slowly, shoulders squared. "I found her, Pa." The silence that followed held the weight of 8 years of forbidden conversations. Harrison Pierce's face hardened, deep lines etching around his mouth as he stepped onto the porch. "You've been looking all this time?" "Every spare moment." The older man removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair that had once matched Thomas's rich brown. "Those people nearly destroyed us, Tom. Stole our water, poisoned our reputation with the bank. Her father would have seen us starve if he had his way." "I'm not asking to marry into their family, Pa. I'm going to find the woman I love. She's a Wallace." Harrison spat the name like it was tobacco juice. "She's Penelope." Thomas moved toward the barn where his horse waited, already saddled. "I'm riding out within the hour. You walk away now, you're choosing her over your own blood." Thomas paused, his back to his father. "No, sir. I'm choosing my heart over a feud I never understood in the first place." The spring air carried the scent of pine and possibility as Thomas rode away from the only home he'd ever known, his father's final warning echoing in his mind. "They'll never let you have her, son. Some divides can't be crossed." Thomas had packed light some clothes, his Winchester rifle, enough money to last a few months, and the faded photograph of Penelope he'd cherished through the years. Her smile remained exactly as he remembered, slightly crooked, with a dimple in her left cheek that appeared only when she was truly happy. The trail to Santa Fe would take him through treacherous mountain passes and sun-scorched plains, but Thomas welcomed the challenge. Every mile that passed beneath his horses' hooves brought him closer to keeping the promise he'd made 8 years earlier. He camped that first night under a canopy of stars, stoking a small fire as he reflected on the day Penelope had been taken away. The Wallaces had left under the cover of darkness after Edward Wallace's final confrontation with the Pierce family. Thomas had only learned of their departure the following morning, discovering the empty Wallace house with windows shuttered and doors locked. For months afterward, he'd written letters that were returned unopened. He'd asked travelers passing through if they'd encountered the Wallace family. For years, the answer had always been no until 3 days ago when an old friend had wired from Santa Fe with news. He'd spotted a woman named Penelope Wallace working in a general store in a small town called Sierra Vista. Thomas allowed himself a moment of doubt as the fire crackled. What if she was married now? What if she'd forgotten him? The wilderness offered no answers, only the distant howl of coyotes and the whisper of wind through pine needles. Morning brought renewed determination. Thomas broke camp before sunrise, eager to cover ground while the day was still cool. His horse, Ranger, was a sturdy Mustang he'd broken himself 3 years prior, a reliable companion for the uncertain journey ahead. The second day of travel brought him to the mining town of Silver Gulch. The settlement was typical of boom towns that had sprung up across the West, hastily constructed wooden buildings, muddy streets, and saloons that never seemed to close. Thomas tethered Ranger outside the general store and stepped inside, hoping to replenish his supplies. "Afternoon," greeted the storekeeper, an older man with spectacles perched on his nose. "What can I help you with?" "Just passing through," Thomas replied, selecting a few items. "Heading toward Santa Fe. Business or pleasure?" Thomas considered the question. "Unfinished business." The shopkeeper nodded knowingly. "Aren't we all running toward something or away from something out here? That's the story of the West, I suppose." As Thomas paid for his supplies, he hesitated before asking, "You wouldn't happen to know of a family named Wallace, would you?" "They left Colorado about 8 years back." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Can't say that I do, though folks come and go so quickly these days it's hard to keep track." Thomas nodded, disappointed but not surprised. The West was vast and people could disappear easily within its expanse. That night, as he camped beneath an outcropping of rocks that provided shelter from the increasing wind, Thomas removed the locket from his saddlebag, the twin to the one he'd given Penelope. Inside was a small portrait of them both, painted by a traveling artist who had passed through Pine Creek when they were 15. He traced the outline of her face with his finger, remembering the day it was created. They had sat on a bench outside her father's store, trying not to laugh as the artist scolded them for fidgeting. Penelope's hand had found his beneath the edge of her skirt, their fingers intertwined where no one could see. "We'll look at these when we're old and gray," she had whispered, "and remember this exact moment." Instead, the lockets had become symbols of separation rather than togetherness. Thomas closed the silver oval with a soft click and returned it to his bag. Tomorrow, he would continue east, following the thin thread of hope that had sustained him for 8 long years. The journey to Santa Fe took 6 more days, including a perilous river crossing where Thomas nearly lost Ranger to the swift current. The settlements grew larger and more established as he traveled, the rugged frontier giving way to territorial civilization. Santa Fe bustled with activity, traders from Mexico, soldiers from nearby Fort Marcy, settlers heading west, and Native Americans from the surrounding pueblos. Thomas felt out of place in the ancient city with its adobe buildings and mix of languages. He located the telegraph office where his friend Ellie worked, pushing through the door with anxious energy. "Thomas Pierce," Ellie exclaimed, abandoning his post behind the counter to embrace his old friend. "You made good time." "I didn't waste any once I got your wire," Thomas replied, clapping Ellie on the shoulder. "Tell me everything you know." Ellie gestured for Thomas to follow him to a small back room where they could speak privately. "I was delivering a message to Sierra Vista small settlement about 40 miles southeast of here. There's a general store run by a man named Hawkins. She works there, keeping the books from what I could tell. And you're certain it was her? Same golden hair, same green eyes." "She goes by Penelope Wallace, not married as far as I could tell, no ring on her finger." Thomas exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. "Her family didn't see them, only spoke to her briefly, but she mentioned living above the store, seemed reserved, not unfriendly, just careful." 8 years is a long time," Thomas said, more to himself than to Ellie. "What will you do if her family's still against you?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "I didn't come this far to be turned away. I'll face whatever comes." Ellie offered Thomas a place to stay for the night, which he gratefully accepted. He spent the evening studying a crude map of the territory, tracing the route to Sierra Vista with his finger. Tomorrow, the search that had consumed nearly a third of his life would finally end. Morning arrived with a clarity that seemed fitting for such a momentous day. Thomas departed Santa Fe as the city was coming to life, Ranger rested and ready for the final stretch of their journey. The terrain gradually shifted from mountainous to desert as they traveled southeast, the sun beating down relentlessly. By mid-afternoon, Thomas spotted Sierra Vista in the distance, a collection of buildings nestled against a backdrop of mountains. His heart hammered against his ribs as Ranger carried him into town. Sierra Vista was modest but prosperous, with a main street lined by sturdy buildings constructed of wood and adobe. Thomas dismounted in front of Hawkins' general store, his legs suddenly unsteady beneath him. He secured Ranger to the hitching post, removed his hat, and attempted to smooth his travel-worn appearance. The bell above the door announced his entrance. The store was well stocked, shelves lined with dry goods, tools, fabric, and sundries. A heavy-set man with mutton chop whiskers stood behind the counter, eyeing Thomas with the practiced assessment of a businessman. "Afternoon," the man greeted. "What can I help you with?" "I'm looking for someone," Thomas said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Penelope Wallace." The shopkeeper's expression shifted subtly. "And who might be asking?" "An old friend from Colorado, Thomas Pierce." Before the man could respond, a door at the back of the store opened, and Thomas's world tilted on its axis. There she stood, Penelope Wallace, a vision from his memories yet changed by time. Her golden hair was pulled back in a practical style, her once girlish figure now gracefully mature. But her eyes, those remarkable green eyes that had haunted his dreams, remained unchanged. She froze in the doorway, color draining from her face as recognition dawned. The ledger she'd been holding slipped from her fingers, landing on the wooden floor with a thud that seemed to break the spell. "Thomas," her voice was barely above a whisper. "I kept my promise," he said simply. Penelope's hand went instinctively to her throat, where beneath her high-collared dress, Thomas knew she would find the silver locket. The shopkeeper cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Wallace, do you know this man?" she nodded, unable to tear her gaze from Thomas. "Yes, Mr. Hawkins, he's from my hometown." Thomas took a step forward, his hat clutched in his hands. "I've been looking for you for 8 years. Emotion flickered across her face, surprise, joy, and something Thomas couldn't quite read. Fear, perhaps? She glanced toward the door, then back to him. "Mr. Hawkins, might I take my break now?" she asked, composure returning to her voice. The shopkeeper looked between them with obvious curiosity but nodded. "Of course, take what time you need." Penelope retrieved her fallen ledger, carefully setting it on the counter before gesturing toward the door. "We should talk outside." Thomas followed her into the afternoon sunlight. She led him away from the main street toward a small church garden where a bench sat beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. Only when they were seated, a respectable distance between them, did she finally meet his gaze directly. "How did you find me?" she asked. Thomas explained about Ellie's telegram, watching as she absorbed each word. Up close, he could see the subtle changes time had wrought, a maturity in her features, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "Your family?" he asked when he'd finished his explanation. Penelope's shoulders tensed. "My father passed 3 years ago, influenza. My mother returned east to live with her sister in Boston. My brother William runs the family business interests in Denver now." "I'm sorry about your father," Thomas said sincerely. Despite the complicated history, she nodded, accepting his condolence. "Why are you here, Thomas? You know why." He leaned forward slightly. "I made a promise that night that I'd find you no matter what. We were 16, she said softly. Children. And now we're adults who understand that some things aren't possible simply because we wish them to be." Thomas felt his heart constrict. "Are you telling me you don't feel anything anymore?" Penelope looked away, her profile silhouetted against the late afternoon light. "I'm telling you that the world is more complicated than we understood when we were young. Is there someone else?" "No." She turned back to him. "But my brother, he's become the man my father was, more so, perhaps. The feud didn't end for him when we left Pine Creek." Thomas reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "Then come away with me, we'll go somewhere your brother won't find us." A sad smile crossed her lips. "Always so impulsive. Some things never change. My feelings for you haven't." Something in her expression softened. "Mine haven't either, Thomas, but I can't simply leave. I have responsibilities here." "To the store, to Hawkins, to myself," she replied firmly. "I've built a life here, independence I never had in my father's house. Would you ask me to abandon that on a moment's notice?" Thomas hadn't considered this. In his mind, finding Penelope had been the conclusion of his quest, not the beginning of a new challenge. I didn't think, no, you didn't. She squeezed his hand gently. But that's why I always loved you. Your heart leads, even when perhaps it shouldn't. Hope surged through him at her use of the word loved. Then give me time. Let me prove that what we could have is worth whatever changes we both need to make. Penelope studied him for a long moment. My brother visits every month to check on operations here. He's invested in several businesses in town. He'll be here in 3 days. Then we have 3 days, Thomas said decisively. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. To do what exactly? To remember who we were to each other, to discover who we are now. She stood, smoothing her skirts in a gesture that spoke of her uncertainty. I should return to work. Mr. Hawkins has been good to me, and I won't take advantage of his kindness. Thomas rose as well, returning his hat to his head. Where can I find you later? I live in the rooms above the store. There's a side entrance. She hesitated. I finish work at 6. Perhaps you could call at 7. We could walk to the cafe for supper. I'll be there, Thomas promised, his spirits lifting. It wasn't the joyful reunion he'd imagined during countless nights under the stars, but it was a beginning. As Penelope turned to leave, she paused. Thomas, be careful in town. My brother has friends here. If word reaches him that you've arrived. The warning hung in the air between them, unfinished but clear. Thomas nodded his understanding. I didn't come this far to lose you again. I'll be discreet. She offered a final smile before walking back toward the store, her steps measured and deliberate. Thomas watched her go, recognizing that the girl he'd loved had become a woman of substance and determination. It made his heart ache with pride and renewed longing. He spent the remainder of the afternoon securing lodging at the modest hotel near the edge of town, introducing himself simply as a cattle buyer passing through. After stabling Ranger and refreshing himself with a bath and shave, Thomas counted the hours until 7 o'clock would arrive. The town grew quiet as dusk settled, businesses closing and families gathering for evening meals. Thomas made his way to the side entrance of Hawkins' general store, taking care not to draw attention. He straightened his best shirt saved in his saddlebags for this moment and knocked softly on the door. Penelope answered quickly, as though she'd been waiting nearby. She'd changed from her work clothes into a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Her hair was loosened from its practical arrangement, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. You came, she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. I said I would. Thomas offered his arm. Shall we? The cafe was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and lanterns casting a warm glow. They were seated in a corner, away from the few other patrons. For the first few minutes, an awkward silence hung between them, 8 years of separation creating a chasm that words alone couldn't bridge. Tell me about your life, Penelope finally said after they'd ordered. What happened after we left? Thomas described his years on the ranch, his father's declining health following a fall from a horse, his mother's quiet strength holding the family together. He spoke of his search for her, the letters sent to every Wallace he could find in the territory, the inquiries to travelers, the disappointments. Your father must be furious that you're here, she observed. Thomas nodded grimly. He made it clear I was choosing you over family. Penelope looked down at her plate. I'm sorry, I never wanted to come between you and your father. It wasn't your doing, Thomas assured her. Now tell me about you. How did you end up here in Sierra Vista? She described the difficult years after leaving Pine Creek, her father's failing business ventures, her mother's increasing bitterness, her brother's hardening resolve to restore the family fortune at any cost. When father died, William took control of everything. He sent mother east and established me here, where he'd invested in several businesses, including Hawkins's store. I think he believed he was doing right by me, giving me a respectable position. But, Thomas prompted, sensing her reservation. But it was just another cage, albeit with a prettier view. She smiled ruefully. I'm grateful for the position, for the independence it offers, but William checks on his investments regularly, including me. Your brother doesn't sound like the boy I remember. He's not. The feud changed him, Thomas. It consumed him in a way it never did me. As they finished their meal, The conversation shifted to lighter memories summers spent exploring the hills around Pine Creek, the harvest festival where they'd first danced together, the secret meeting place by the creek where they'd shared their first kiss at 15. Walking back toward the store, Thomas felt the years between them beginning to dissolve. When they reached her door, he took her hand gently. "I'd like to see you tomorrow, if you're willing." Penelope hesitated only briefly. "I have the afternoon free. Mr. Hawkins gives me Thursdays off." "I'll come at noon," Thomas promised. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he placed the softest of kisses on her cheek, breathing in the familiar lavender scent that had haunted his dreams. "Good night, Penny," he whispered, using the childhood nickname only he had ever called her. Her eyes glistened in the moonlight. "Good night, Thomas." He walked back to his hotel with a lightness in his step that had been absent for 8 years. The following day dawned clear and promising. Thomas spent the morning exploring Sierra Vista, taking the measure of the town where Penelope had built her new life. It was smaller than Pine Creek but more prosperous, with a distinctly Spanish influence in its architecture and culture. At noon precisely, he knocked on Penelope's door. She greeted him wearing a riding skirt and simple blouse, her hair braided practically down her back. "I thought we might ride," she suggested. "There's a place outside town I'd like to show you," Thomas agreed readily. They collected Ranger from the livery, where Penelope arranged for a gentle mare named Daisy. Soon they were riding east of town, following a trail that wound through scrubby hills dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. "I found this place my first month here," Penelope explained as they rode. "It became my sanctuary when I missed home too desperately." After an hour's ride, they crested a hill to reveal a hidden valley where a small spring created an oasis of green. Cottonwood trees provided shade around the water, and wildflowers dotted the surrounding grassland. "It's beautiful," Thomas said as they dismounted. Penelope spread a blanket she'd brought in her saddlebag beneath the largest cottonwood. From another bag, she produced bread, cheese, and dried fruit for their lunch. As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than the previous evening. Thomas described his dreams of establishing his own ranch someday, breeding horses rather than cattle. Penelope revealed her secret ambition to open a school in Sierra Vista, having discovered a talent for teaching when helping customers' children with their letters. "I never knew you wanted to teach," Thomas remarked. "I never knew it myself until I came here," she admitted. "People change, Thomas. We find new parts of ourselves." "Some things remain constant," he countered, reaching out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "My feelings for you have only grown stronger with time and distance." Penelope didn't pull away from his touch. "I tried to forget you," she confessed quietly. "I told myself it was childish to hold on to someone I could never have. And yet here you are, and everything I felt comes rushing back as though no time has passed at all." Thomas moved closer, his hand coming to rest at the curve of her neck. "May I kiss you, Penny? Properly this time." Her answer was to lean forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met softly at first, then with increasing certainty as 8 years of separation dissolved in an instant of connection. Thomas cradled her face in his hands as though she were made of precious glass, while Penelope's fingers wound into the fabric of his shirt, anchoring him to her. When they finally parted, both breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I never stopped loving you," he whispered. "Not for a single day." Tears glistened in Penelope's eyes. "I carried you with me always," she admitted, pulling the silver locket from beneath her blouse. "Even when I tried to forget." Thomas reached into his pocket and withdrew his own locket, the match to hers. "We were meant to find each other again, Penny. I believe that with every fiber of my being." They spent the afternoon by the spring, talking, reminiscing, and rediscovering each other. The years of separation had changed them both, but the foundation of their connection remained unshaken. As the sun began its westward descent, they reluctantly gathered their belongings and prepared for the ride back to town. "William arrives tomorrow," Penelope said as they mounted their horses. "He usually stays at the hotel, checks on his investments, and leaves the following morning." Thomas nodded grimly. "What do you want me to do?" She considered the question as they rode side by side. Part of me wants you to hide to avoid a confrontation that could turn ugly, but Another part, another part of me is tired of living according to a feud I never believed in. Her voice strengthened with resolve. I'm 24 years old, Thomas, too old to let others decide my future. Thomas felt pride swell in his chest at her determination. Then we face him together, she nodded, though worry still creased her brow. He arrives on the afternoon stage. Perhaps you could come to dinner at my rooms tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. I'll invite William and tell him I have news. Are you certain? No, she admitted with a small laugh. But I'm certain about us. The rest we'll figure out together. When they reached town, Thomas escorted Penelope to her door, reluctant to part from her. Until tomorrow, he said, kissing her hand. She caught his face between her palms and kissed him firmly on the lips, propriety forgotten. Until tomorrow. That night, Thomas lay awake in his hotel room, mind racing with plans and contingencies. William Wallace had been 4 years older than them, a young man of 20, when the families had parted ways. Thomas remembered him as serious and studious, always in his father's shadow. According to Penelope, grief and ambition had hardened him, intensifying the bitterness Edward Wallace had nurtured. Mourning brought no clarity, only increased anticipation. Thomas spent the day restlessly pacing his room, cleaning his revolver, though he prayed he wouldn't need it, and rehearsing what he might say to the man who stood as perhaps the final obstacle to his happiness with Penelope. At 6:45, Thomas approached Penelope's rooms, dressed in his best clothes, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knocked gently on the door, which opened almost immediately to reveal Penelope, lovely in a green dress that matched her eyes, tension evident in the set of her shoulders. He's already here, she whispered, and he's not pleased about having unexpected company. Thomas squeezed her hand reassuringly. We'll get through this together. The main room of Penelope's apartment was modestly but tastefully furnished. A table had been set for dinner, with 3 place settings arranged around its perimeter. Standing by the window, his back to them as he gazed out at the street below, was William Wallace. He turned as they entered, and Thomas was struck by how much the man resembled his father, the same proud bearing, the same calculating gaze. Recognition dawned immediately, followed by a cold anger that transformed his features. What is the meaning of this? William demanded, his voice controlled but laced with fury. A Pierce in my sister's home. William, Penelope began, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. This is Thomas Pierce. I know who he is, William interrupted. What I don't know is why he's here or why you would invite him. Thomas stepped forward, offering his hand. Mr. Wallace, it's been a long time. William ignored the outstretched hand. Not long enough. Penelope, explain yourself. Penelope moved to Thomas's side, her chin lifted defiantly. Thomas and I have reconnected. He's been searching for me for 8 years. Reconnected? William's laugh was without humor. You were children playing at things you didn't understand. We're not children anymore, Thomas interjected quietly. And I believe we understand perfectly well what's between us. William's gaze shifted between them, his expression darkening as he noted their proximity, the natural way they stood together. So the Pierce boy comes riding into town, spins some tale of devotion, and you're ready to throw away family loyalty. Have you forgotten what his father did to ours? I haven't forgotten anything, Penelope replied, including the fact that the feud was between our fathers, not us. The Pierces stole our water rights, William countered, anger rising in his voice. They turned the town against us, forced us to leave our home. That's not how I remember it, Thomas said, maintaining his composure with effort. Your father dammed the creek that fed both properties. My father fought the action in court and won. A corrupt judge in a town that favored ranchers over merchants. William's face had flushed with anger. Our father built that town and your family destroyed him for it. Penelope stepped between them, her voice firm. Enough, both of you. The past is done, William. Father is gone. The feud should have died with him. And what would you have me do? Welcome this man with open arms, allow him to court my sister as though our family's suffering meant nothing? I love her, Thomas stated simply. I have since we were children. No feud, no family disagreement, no amount of time or distance has changed that. William's expression hardened. Love. What does a cowboy know of love? You want what all men want: possession. My sister has position here, respectability. What can you offer her except a life of hardship and isolation? He offers me choice, Penelope interrupted, her voice stronger than Thomas had ever heard it. And happiness. Two things you and father never considered important. The words landed like physical blows. William took a step back, genuine hurt flashing briefly across his features before his mask of anger returned. I've provided for you, protected you, you've controlled me, Penelope corrected. Just as father did. You placed me here like a chess piece, useful for your business interests but never consulted about my own desires. A tense silence fell over the room. William moved to the table, gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles whitened. And what are your desires, sister? To abandon everything for a man whose family destroyed ours. My desire is to live my own life, she replied. With Thomas, if he'll have me, if I'll have you, Thomas echoed incredulously. Penny, I crossed half the territory to find you. There's nothing I want more in this world. William observed their exchange with growing realization. So this is already decided. You've made your choice without any consideration for family obligation. I've spent 8 years fulfilling family obligation, Penelope countered. I'm asking you now, as my brother, to respect my decision. William's gaze shifted to Thomas, measuring him with cold calculation. And if I refuse, if I remind you that I control your position here, your livelihood, Thomas tensed, prepared to defend Penelope against threats, but she stepped forward confidently. Then you would prove you're exactly like father, willing to sacrifice my happiness for your pride. Her voice softened. But I don't believe you are, William. Somewhere beneath that hardened exterior is the brother who taught me to ride, who read me stories when I was afraid of thunderstorms. Something in William's expression flickered a momentary softening. You're asking me to forgive the unforgivable. I'm asking you to let go of a hatred that was never yours to begin with, she corrected gently. To see Thomas as a man who loves your sister, not as the enemy you were taught to despise. Thomas watched the internal struggle play across William's features, duty warring with affection, pride with compassion. He recognized the battle, having fought a similar one with his own father. My sister's happiness has always mattered to me, William finally said, his voice quiet. Even when my methods of ensuring it were perhaps misguided. Then give us your blessing, Thomas urged, not for my sake but for hers. William's gaze remained fixed on Penelope. Is this truly what you want, to tie your future to his? It is, she answered without hesitation. It always has been. A heavy silence filled the room as William considered her words. Finally, he straightened, his decision apparently made. I cannot give you my blessing, he said formally. The wounds run too deep, the history too bitter. Penelope's face fell, but William continued before she could speak. However, I will not stand in your way. Your position here, your home, they remain yours regardless of your association with Mr. Pierce. He turned to Thomas, his expression stern. If you bring her suffering, if you fail to provide for her properly, this temporary truce ends. Do I make myself clear? Thomas nodded solemnly. Perfectly clear, sir. It wasn't the warm acceptance they might have hoped for, but it was a crack in the wall of hostility that had separated their families for so many years. William declined to stay for dinner, citing business that required his attention. Before departing, he embraced Penelope stiffly, whispering something in her ear that brought tears to her eyes. When the door closed behind him, Thomas turned to Penelope questioningly. What did he say to you? She wiped away a stray tear, a small smile forming. He said father would have disowned me, but mother would have understood, that he'd tell her I was happy when he saw her next. Thomas pulled her into his arms, relief washing over him. It's a start, more than I dared hope for. They stood embracing in the center of the room, the dinner cooling on the table, forgotten as they savored the first moments of their future together, a future no longer shadowed by family disapproval. What happens now? Penelope asked, her head resting against his chest. Thomas considered the question carefully. That depends on what you want, Penny. I came here prepared to take you away, to start fresh somewhere new, but I understand now that you've built a life here, one that matters to you." She looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "Would you stay?" "In Sierra Vista? I'd stay anywhere, do anything if it meant being with you," he answered honestly. "But eventually, I'd like us to have a place of our own, perhaps land nearby where I could raise horses and you could have your school. A dream of our own, not defined by either of our families." Her smile brightened. "I'd like that very much." Thomas cupped her face gently. "Then that's what we'll build together." In the weeks that followed, Thomas and Penelope carefully constructed the foundation of their shared life. Thomas found work at the livery stable, his knowledge of horses quickly earning him the owner's respect. Penelope continued at the general store while beginning to offer reading lessons to local children 2 evenings a week. Word of their relationship spread through the small community. Some people whispered about the strange circumstances the cowboy who had traveled so far to find his childhood sweetheart, defying family opposition. But mostly, the town accepted them as they accepted anyone willing to work hard and contribute to community life. 1 month after his arrival in Sierra Vista, Thomas took Penelope back to the hidden spring where they had reconnected. As the sun painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, he knelt before her and presented a simple gold ring. "I can't offer you wealth or position," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "But I can promise you this: every day of my life will be dedicated to your happiness. Will you marry me, Penny? Will you build a life with me, whatever may come?" Tears of joy spilled down her cheeks as she pulled him to his feet. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Today and always, yes." They were married that autumn in the small church beside the garden where they'd first spoken after their reunion. Mr. Hawkins gave the bride away, beaming with paternal pride. To everyone's surprise, William attended, standing stiffly at the back of the church, but offering a grudging handshake to the groom afterward. More surprising still was the arrival of a letter from Colorado a week before the wedding. Harrison Pierce had not softened enough to attend his son's marriage to a Wallace, but his brief note acknowledged Thomas's determination and wished the couple well, the closest thing to a blessing the old rancher could manage. With their combined savings and a small loan from the bank arranged, Thomas suspected, with William's quiet influence, they purchased 10 acres of land at the edge of town. A modest house took shape through the winter months, with Thomas working alongside the builders whenever he wasn't at the livery. Spring brought completion of their home and news that their family would soon expand. Penelope's pregnancy, confirmed by the town doctor, filled Thomas with a mixture of joy and trepidation, the awesome responsibility of parenthood adding new urgency to his plans. By summer, Thomas had begun acquiring horses for breeding 2 fine mares and a stallion with impeccable bloodlines. The small stable he'd built behind their house would soon need expansion if his dreams took shape as planned. Penelope continued teaching, her growing reputation as an educator leading to formal discussions with the town council about establishing a proper school. Her condition slowed her physically, but seemed only to sharpen her determination to create educational opportunities for the children of Sierra Vista. Their son, Harrison William Pierce, was born on a crisp October morning in 1877, a robust child with his mother's green eyes and a tuft of his father's brown hair. They named him to honor both grandfathers, a bridge between families that had once been enemies. William, who had gradually warmed to his role as brother-in-law, arrived from Denver bearing gifts and news. Harrison Pierce had suffered a second stroke and was unlikely to recover. Though Thomas had exchanged several cautiously cordial letters with his father since the wedding, the news hit him hard. "You should go to him," Penelope urged, cradling their infant son. "Take Harry to meet his grandfather while there's still time." Thomas hesitated, torn between duty to his father and reluctance to leave his wife and newborn. "I can't ask you to travel so soon after giving birth." "Then go alone," she insisted. "I have William here and Mrs. Hawkins has been like a mother to me. We'll be fine for a few weeks." After much deliberation, Thomas agreed. The journey to Pine Creek was long but familiar, each mile bringing memories of his desperate search for Penelope and the subsequent journey that had reunited them. Pine Creek had changed little in the nearly 2 years since he'd left. The ranch, however, showed signs of neglect, fences in need of repair, fewer cattle in the pastures. Thomas's younger brother, James, now 20, greeted him with obvious relief. "He's been asking for you," James said as they approached the house. Ever since the doctor said there wasn't much time left. Harrison Pierce lay in the bed he'd shared with his wife for 40 years, his once powerful frame diminished by illness. Mary Pierce sat beside him, her hand clasping his withered one, her face lighting with joy at the sight of her eldest son. "Thomas," she breathed, rising to embrace him. "Thank God you've come." The old rancher's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his wife's voice. Recognition dawned slowly as he focused on Thomas. "Son," he rasped, his voice barely audible, "you came back." Thomas moved to the bedside, emotion tightening his throat. "Of course I came, Pa." "The Wallace girl?" Harrison asked, struggling to form the words. "My wife now," Thomas replied gently. "We have a son, named him Harrison William." A ghost of a smile touched the old man's lips. "Named for his grandfathers, eh?" "Yes, sir, for the two most stubborn men I've ever known." Harrison's chuckle dissolved into a coughing fit that Mary soothed with a sip of water. When he'd recovered, he fixed Thomas with a surprisingly lucid gaze. "Was I wrong, son? About the Wallaces?" Thomas considered the question carefully. The water rights dispute was legitimate. "The hatred that grew from it, that's what was wrong, on both sides." Harrison nodded weakly. "Wasted too many years on hate, your mother tried to tell me." Mary squeezed her husband's hand. "We all make mistakes, Harrison. What matters is that we learn from them." The old rancher's eyes drifted closed. "Bring your boy next time. Want to see my namesake?" "I will, Pa," Thomas promised, though they both knew there might not be a next time. Harrison Pierce passed peacefully 3 days later, his family gathered around him. After the funeral, Thomas sat with his mother and brother at the kitchen table discussing the future of the ranch. "James has been managing things as best he can," Mary explained, "but the place needs a firm hand. Your father's illness took a toll on operations." James looked uncomfortable. "Truth is, I'm not cut out for ranching, Tom. Been thinking about law school in Denver, just didn't have the heart to tell Pa." Thomas considered his brother thoughtfully. "You always did have a head for books." Mary touched Thomas's hand. "We're not asking you to come back, son. You've made your life in New Mexico with your wife and child, but we need to decide what happens to the Pierce legacy." The question weighed heavily as Thomas rode the boundaries of the ranch over the next few days. The land was still good, the water plentiful, the potential enormous with proper management. Yet his heart remained in Sierra Vista with Penelope and their son, with the modest horse breeding operation he'd begun. On his final evening at the ranch, Thomas proposed a solution. "I'll stay through the spring to get things back in order. Then we'll sell half the cattle to fund James's education and hire a capable foreman to oversee operations. I'll return quarterly to check progress." Mary studied her eldest son. "And Penelope, your baby, your horses." "Penelope understands family obligation," Thomas replied, "and this is temporary. By summer, we'll have established a system that allows me to manage from a distance." The plan, though imperfect, was accepted by all. Thomas wrote to Penelope explaining the situation, receiving in return a letter of such understanding and support that it brought tears to his eyes. "Do what you must for your family," she wrote. "Harry and I will be here waiting when your duty is fulfilled. Perhaps by then, the school board will have approved my proposal, and I'll have news of my own to share." Winter gave way to spring, and Thomas worked from dawn until dusk to restore the Pierce Ranch to prosperity. James, knowing his future lay elsewhere, nonetheless threw himself into learning everything he could to assist his brother. Mary, freed from the constraints of caring for an invalid husband, revealed a keen business mind that surprised both her sons. By May, the ranch was showing signs of recovery. Fences had been mended, cattle counted and culled, a capable foreman hired and trained in Harrison's methods. As promised, Thomas prepared to return to Sierra Vista, to the life and family waiting for him there. His mother walked with him to the waiting stagecoach. "You've done your father proud," she said, embracing him tightly. "And me as well. I'll be back in 3 months," he promised. "Sooner if needed," Mary smiled knowingly. "Bring them with you next time, my daughter-in-law and grandson. This is their legacy too now." The journey home seemed interminable, each mile stretching his patience thinner. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Sierra Vista, Thomas barely waited for it to stop before leaping down, his eyes scanning the small crowd for Penelope. She stood apart from the others, Harry balanced on her hip, her face illuminated with joy as she spotted him. Thomas crossed the distance between them in long strides, gathering them both into his arms. "Welcome home," Penelope whispered against his neck. "I've missed you both so much," Thomas replied, taking his son into his arms. The boy, now 6 months old, studied his father solemnly before breaking into a toothless grin that mirrored his mother's. That evening, as Harry slept peacefully in his cradle, Penelope shared her news the school board had approved her proposal. Construction of Sierra Vista's first proper schoolhouse would begin in the fall, with Penelope Wallace Pierce as its teacher. "I never dreamed they would agree so quickly," she admitted as they sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. "William may have had something to do with it. He's become quite the advocate for education in the territories." Thomas smiled, unsurprised by his brother-in-law's evolution. "He's a good man beneath that prickly exterior. Like his father before him, I imagine. Better, I think," Penelope mused. "He's learning to let go of old grudges." As summer turned to autumn, Thomas established a rhythm that allowed him to balance his responsibilities to both the Pierce Ranch and his growing horse breeding business. Quarterly trips to Colorado kept him absent for a week at a time, but never longer a compromise that satisfied his sense of duty without sacrificing his presence in his son's life. Penelope's school opened in January 1879, a simple but sturdy building with large windows and proper desks. 15 students enrolled initially, with more joining as word spread of the teacher's patience and skill. When Harry turned 2, he became the school's youngest pupil, sitting quietly with picture books while his mother taught older children their letters and numbers. By the spring of 1880, Thomas's horse breeding operation had gained a reputation throughout the territory. His stock, known for intelligence and endurance, attracted buyers from as far away as California. With the business thriving, he hired an assistant, allowing him more time with his family and flexibility for his Colorado trips. During one such trip, accompanied for the first time by Penelope and Harry, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Pierce Ranch. William Wallace, now a successful businessman with interests throughout Colorado and New Mexico, had come to discuss a proposition. "The railroad is expanding westward," William explained over dinner in the ranch house. "They need reliable horses for construction crews, surveyors, security. Hundreds of animals with precisely the qualities Thomas has been breeding." "A government contract?" Thomas asked. Intrigued, William nodded. "Potentially very lucrative, but it would require significant expansion, more land, more breeding stock." "More capital than I currently have," Thomas concluded. "Which is where I come in," William said, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm prepared to invest as a silent partner, your expertise, my financing." The proposal was unexpected but compelling. Thomas glanced at Penelope, who seemed equally surprised by her brother's offer. "Why would you do this?" Thomas asked directly. "You've never shown interest in horses before." William considered his response carefully. "Let's call it an investment in family. My sister is happy, my nephew is thriving, and you've proven yourself a man of your word. Beyond that, it's simply good business." Later that night, as they prepared for bed in Thomas's childhood room, Penelope voiced her thoughts. "He's extending an olive branch, Tom, in his own way." "I know," Thomas agreed. "The question is whether we should accept it. Why wouldn't we? It's an incredible opportunity." Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, pulling her down beside him, because it would mean dividing our time between Sierra Vista and Pine Creek. The operation would be too large to manage otherwise. Penelope considered this. Perhaps that's not such a terrible thing. Harry should know both sides of his heritage, the Pierce Ranch and the town his mother helped build. You'd be willing to split your time, What about the school? Miss Jenkins is nearly ready to take over some classes, she reasoned. And perhaps Pine Creek needs educational improvement as well. Thomas studied his wife's face, marveling at her adaptability, her willingness to embrace change. Have I told you lately how remarkable you are? Her smile was luminous in the lamplight. Not since this morning. The partnership with William marked a new chapter in their lives. The horse breeding operation expanded dramatically, with facilities in both New Mexico and Colorado. As predicted, they began dividing their time between locations, spending springs and summers in Sierra Vista and falls and winters at the Pierce Ranch. Harry grew into a thoughtful boy who inherited his father's affinity for horses and his mother's love of learning. By age 7, he was equally at home galloping across the Pierce pastures or helping younger children with reading at his mother's school. In 1883, their family expanded with the birth of twin daughters, Elizabeth Mary and Catherine Rose. The girls, unlike their serious older brother, were bundles of energy who exhausted and delighted their parents in equal measure. As the children grew, so did the Penelope Wallace enterprise. What had begun as a modest horse breeding operation evolved into a diverse business that included cattle, timber, and eventually interests in the very railroad that had provided their first major contract. William, who had never married, became a beloved uncle who spoiled his nieces and nephew shamelessly. His initial coolness toward Thomas transformed over the years into genuine respect and eventually friendship, the ancient feud fading into family legend rather than living animosity. Mary Pierce lived to see her 80th birthday, surrounded by 3 grandchildren who adored her stories of frontier life and pioneer hardships. James completed law school and established a practice in Denver, specializing in water rights and irony not lost on any of them. By 1890, Thomas and Penelope had achieved a prosperity neither could have imagined when they reunited in Sierra Vista 14 years earlier. Yet their greatest wealth lay not in land or livestock or business interests, but in the family they had created and the love that had survived separation, opposition, and the passage of time. On the 20th anniversary of their reunion, Thomas took Penelope back to the hidden spring where he had proposed. Though both were now in their 40s, with strands of silver threading through their hair, the spark between them remained undimmed by the years. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked as they sat beneath the cottonwood tree, now significantly larger than when they had first picnicked in its shade. "Tying your life to mine, despite everything," Penelope's laugh was as musical as it had been in their youth. "What a question, Thomas Pierce. Have the last 18 years not answered it sufficiently? I just want to be sure," he said, taking her hand in his, "that the life we've built has brought you the happiness you deserve." She leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder as it always had. "When I was 16, I thought love was the breathless feeling of first kisses and whispered promises. Now I know it's something far more profound, the choice we make every day to build a life together, to face challenges side by side, to create something lasting from what began as simply hope." Thomas turned to kiss her temple, breathing in the lavender scent that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. "I would find you again, you know, if somehow we were separated, across any distance, through any obstacle." "I know you would," she replied softly, "just as I would find you." Some connections can't be broken, Thomas. Not by family feuds, not by distance, not even by time itself. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the hidden valley in shades of gold, they sat in companionable silence. 2 people who had defied convention and expectation to forge their own destiny. Their journey had not always been easy, but it had always been worthwhile, a testament to the enduring power of a love that had begun in childhood and matured into something unbreakable. From rebellious children to respected pillars of 2 communities, their story had become something of a legend in both Pine Creek and Sierra Vista, the cowboy who had defied everyone to find his childhood sweetheart, the woman who had stood firm for the love she believed in, and the families who had eventually set aside generations of hatred to embrace a shared future. As twilight deepened around them, Thomas helped Penelope to her feet, their hands naturally finding each other as they walked back to their horses. Tomorrow would bring responsibilities and challenges, children's concerns and business matters. But tonight was theirs alone, a moment out of time to celebrate the love that had overcome every obstacle placed in its path. "Let's go home," Penelope said as they mounted their horses. Thomas smiled at the woman who had been his North Star for as long as he could remember. "As long as you're beside me, I'm already there."